Welcome to Blue Talks.
I'm Deanne Neufeld, and like I was introduced, I have been a therapist for 30 years. I feel like I'm giving away my age, but it's true. I really love being a therapist, but it wasn't how I started out. When I was 17, I was bound and determined that I was going to be a music teacher. And so I applied, I auditioned, and I got in. And at this point in time, no one in my family had gone to university. Nobody. So there was a lot of fear. And the message that I got, and that this isn't interpretation or perception, this is the message. You're not smart enough. I don't think you can do this. So that sounds really bad, but I'm going to turn it around, and it's actually going to be one of the key points in my talk today. It is so important. This slide here at the bottom, Keystone Counseling is my own company, and I've had that for 20 years? I can't remember, something like that. And right now I'm working with Whole Therapy in Dartmouth on a contract basis. So to honor them, I put us both up there. What's important to discuss around that story of the message that you're not smart enough, I don't think you can do this. I came from a German Mennonite family. On the left is my grandma and grandpa, my father's parents. On the right, it's a little hard to see, but there's a little white thing in between my grandma and grandpa. That's my dad. And that's his dog. And I didn't actually know this until later when I got my own German Shepherd, that was my dad's favorite dog. I'm like, how did that happen? But it did. So my dad was the oldest of 11 siblings. Now, 2 died in infancy. The rest did thrive. And so there was 9, only 1 girl. So when you think about the German Mennonite culture, I don't know if any of you know about it. It's very strict. Children are seen and not heard. Speak when you're spoken to. Women are in the kitchen. Men are elsewhere. And that includes the boys, brothers, cousins. And I remember from a very young age, when the dinner was done and the 500 million people went their own way, the women were in the kitchen doing the dishes. And I'm like, oh no. So I go into the living room and I say, boys, it's your turn. Nobody moved. And the women did the dishes. So I was a bit of a challenge for my dad because I would fondly call myself a flibbertigibbet. I have a really silly streak that throughout my lifetime in jobs and other kinds of situations, people tried to snuff that. And I'm saying now, if you got a freak flag, you need to fly that freak flag. You fly it, sister, right? So I'm not a very good German Mennonite. Sorry, Dad. Some of those values and morals, though, that my dad did instill are in me. And I think that's really important to acknowledge. When I was 18 months old, my biological mother left. So I was 18 months. My sister would have been 5 and a half, and my brother would have been about 8 and a half. And so here's my dad with these 1, 2, 3, if you want to say it in German, 3 little kids. So my great Aunt Susie, the grandmother or the sister of my grandmother that you saw, moved in, mostly to care for me because I was still a baby and my brother and sister were in school. It's well known in my family that I am very different from pretty much the rest of the family. And I often ponder if it's not due to the time that I got to spend with my Aunt Susie. She was soft and she was kind and she was sweet. And I loved her dearly until she passed in the early 80s. She was very, very, very important to me. So back to the story. Oh no, I want to tell you one other thing first. So apparently when I was little, not unlike now, I was quite a chatterbox. And my dad put me in all of these speaking competitions. And I asked him one time when I was older, why are you putting me in those? And he's like, I didn't. You asked me to. Okay. And then you did. I remember just little snippets of what I used to do in the gym at my elementary school. And one of them was, Charlie was a chatter. Mercy me. He chattered to his sister and he chattered to his brother. He chattered all day long. That was one of them, which is quite apropos now. The other one was, once there was an elephone who tried to be a telephone. No. I mean, an elephant who tried to be a telephant. Mercy me. That's all I remember of those two. I'm sure you can Google them and you can find them. So my sister said to me one day, do you know that God only puts so many words on your tongue? And if you use them all up, you're not going to be able to talk anymore. I was mortified. So I was very quiet. Dad's like, what is wrong? I said, Norma told me. Anyway, so that did not stop me. Clearly, I'm still a chatterbox, and I just embrace that flibba-de-gibbet side. So back to the you're not smart enough. So I auditioned, I applied, and I got in. Now, remember the message that I got. You're not smart enough, and I don't think you can do this. What do you think happened? I bombed. Like, I don't mean I failed. I mean I bombed so bad they kicked me out of university. So at 17, I didn't know the most important lesson of all. And if you take nothing out of this talk, please take this. That was not my fear. It was not my voice, and it was not my destiny. But it got me for a bit, right? So once something gets into your subconscious, we need to do that work. And that is one of the things that pushed me into some intensive clinical hypnotherapy training, understanding how those early messages start to create a story. So I lowered my expectations. Well, they must be right. I can't do it. So I took like a smaller course and became a medical office assistant. And that's my grad. So that's in the 80s. You're not going to see that hair ever again. And probably that blue eyeshadow and all of that's not going to happen. But these hairdos kept the hairspray industries with money coming in, because that was 60-mile-an-hour hair. When you went in the wind, this is what happened. It didn't move. And so that was great. But that was, so I graduated as an MOA, and I did that for a few years. And then I ended up as the receptionist at the mental health clinic in Saskatoon. And I was just doing my thing. I really had no other aspirations. That's what I was doing. So I was the check-in point. So when patients came in, they would be, hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm here to see so-and-so. I'm like, okay, great. I'll let them know. Did that. So over time, the patients started coming early and stood at my desk and talked and talked and talked and talked and talked. Then when the therapists came to get them, they said, I actually don't have anything more to talk about because I already talked to Deanne. Well, that didn't go over very well. And the therapist complained to the director, who ironically was also a German Mennonite. Just kind of one of those synchronicities, I guess. So he wrote me a letter. Instead of giving me, heck for not doing my job and talking to all the patients and ruining the sessions, he wrote me a letter. And in this letter, he said, we really appreciate you being our receptionist. You do a great job. We're really happy. But I strongly encourage you to go back to school to become a therapist. Now, that's one of the key points that I really want to discuss today. So the first point is what we think affects how we feel, and then that outcome, right? The behavior, the outcome, the consequence. The second one is learning how to discern what is yours and what is not yours. And the third is not so random acts of kindness. So when you think of random acts of kindness, which are lovely, right? You're in the drive-through and you're like, I'm going to pay for the guy behind me. Wonderful. The guy's like, that's great. Love it, right? That's a random act of kindness. I'm talking about not so random acts of kindness. I'm talking about planned, heartfelt messages. They don't have to be a letter like Dr. John Elias did. And some people might say, I don't think that's really going to make a difference. I'm living proof. That letter, you guys, changed my life. For the director of mental health to sit down, because he didn't have a secretary, by the way, sit down and type that letter and sign it and hand it to me at my desk, changed my life. I tried to get a picture of him, but I couldn't find one. But I don't know if he's still alive or not. But I just put that energy out there. Thank you, Dr. John Elias. A few years later, my sister and I were at the Symphony in Saskatoon, and we ran into him. And he was like, what are you doing now, Deanne? I'm like, I'm a therapist. So I was really glad to run into him, and I haven't seen him since. So when I decided to go back to university after I got that letter, the university wouldn't let me in. Why? Because the rake hit my face and I completely bombed, right? So they said, you have to take a course as an unclassified student and prove to us that you can do it. Well, this time I had already figured out the fear wasn't mine. The doubt wasn't mine. I got this and I can do this. You've probably heard, she thought she couldn't, so she did. I did. So I went and I took as an unclassified student Psych 101. It was 2 semesters, so September to December, and then January to April. And I got 96%. And I worked really hard. That was so important to me, to get that kind of mark. So long story short, entered and started on my journey to be a clinical therapist. Then I moved about. And I've figured out since then that I need to be slightly outside of my comfort zone in order to thrive. If things are stale and not challenging, it's like my soul kind of withers. And I can't live like that. I just can't. And that's why, Connie, your story today about your hike from London to Rome it just touched me, Connie. The way that you talked about it and the challenges that you went through, it really touched me. And I'm thankful that you shared that. So I kind of wandered around a bit, and you can't sing the blues until you pay your dues, right? So my first job as a mental health therapist was rural Saskatchewan. Walked in, stack of files, laptop, car keys. 4 rural communities, off you go. So that was my first job. Sink or swim. I swam. Then I moved to Alberta, where I got my master's degree. Then I moved to Kelowna, where I started my private practice, yada, yada. And now I'm starting my 6th year here in beautiful Halifax. So it's been a roundabout kind of way for me. If I had been a music teacher, I'm not sure I'd be as fulfilled. So I need to thank those family members for steering me without them actually really even knowing. So I saw some faces when I said the message. It's not a bad message, guys. It's not a bad message. Because later on, I ended up being the therapist for 3 city high schools in Medicine Hat. And those bells drove me crazy. It was like, move on the bell, do this on the bell. Oh, no. So I'm not structured. You can't put me in a box. It's just not me, and it's not going to happen. So I also wanted to talk about, I have a chapter in one of the Blue Talks books compiled by Corey, and it talks about another piece of work that I do with couples. So I first called it Get Your Relationship Out of the Toilet, and people were like, that sounds really negative. So now I call it Reignite Your Relationship. So that's a chapter in that book with Marie Diamond. So that was wonderful. I also have another chapter coming out, and I think it's going to be probably in the next few months, maybe. And it is some of what I'm talking today about, sort of that art of shifting your perspective. What you think affects how you feel and then how you behave. My life could have been very different if I wasn't able to embrace me and not take on other people's fears, right? So here is a really great example of what you think affects how you feel. I failed in university, right? 1985, I failed. I bombed. However, I don't think of fail as fail. I think of it as the first attempt in learning. And if you take that perspective, you can't do anything wrong. You learn it. If it's not for you, let's just move on. So, my family loved Fred Flintstone. And I remember when I was kind of putting together this A plus B equals C, what you think, I remembered this skit. And Fred was doing something, can't remember exactly what it was, but he had these two voices. And one was positive and one was encouraging and one was like, you should do this, right? And the temptation, looking like a devil, but let's just call him temptation, was telling him, no, you should do that. You should do that. That's a great idea. So I take that, and you get to decide who you're going to feed, right? So I also look at this as the temptation could represent our ego. And I'm not talking about ego as in egomaniac, I'm the best ever. I'm talking about that survival mechanism, that ego that's in our subconscious that wants to protect us and that ego does not want change. That ego lives in fear. And if any of you are familiar with Deepak Chopra, he said ego is just another way for saying edging God out. It doesn't matter to me if you think God, the angels, the light, the universal force, doesn't really matter, Buddha, it doesn't matter. The concept is the same. We get to decide who we're going to feed. If we're going to go from ego, I could have been so pissed off at someone trying to snuff my light. However, I didn't. I bobbed and weaved, and I had this other piece. And I call that angel on the other shoulder a wise higher self. Now, if you're in a situation, here's where this discerning what is yours and what is not yours is so important. Because ego is going to try and stifle you. And if your ego is hurt, it's going to lash out. It's going to be defensive. It's going to be blaming, and it's going to be like an ick. It's going to be like this awful feeling. If it's your wise higher self, it's a calm sense of knowing. You get to choose who you feed. I think you can see which might make life just a little bit more peaceful. I'm a dog lover, as I think a lot of you have figured out, because as soon as I bring out my phone, I'm like, look at my dog. And if you don't have the appropriate action, I say, look again. So when I found this, I thought I just really needed to include Pluto, because Pluto has temptation and the wise higher self as well. You can pee on the floor, right? No. So that's in there for me. Maybe for you, but that's in there for me. So when I think about this A plus B equals C, I took this worksheet and just revamped it just a little bit to sink into where do you want to put your focus, okay? So the first box is activating event. So if we use my example, the activating event was my family telling me, we don't think you're smart enough. We don't think you can do this. So the next box is the belief. And my belief ended up being, at the beginning, my family must be right. I'm not smart enough. I can't do this. So then what is the consequence? I bombed, right? And then I embraced that until I figured it out. And there's an example in the next blue book of how the older wise self of me has that figured out. So just to tempt you a little bit, but not in the bad way, just in a good way. So once you do that and you write that out, the next little blue box asks you, are my thoughts in column B realistic and or helpful? So I usually put a little R and then I circle it. And if my client says, well, actually, that's not realistic, I take my red and I put an X on realistic. No, not realistic. Then I put an H, put a circle around the H. Is that actually helpful? No. Sometimes they say, yeah, so I give them a half an X. But then several sessions down the road, we make it a full X, right? Because that's what we do. And then the last one says, what do you want to do about this in the future? So I developed this little tool to help you do check-ins, right? So 10 times a day, 5 times a day, 7 times a day, I often tell people every time you have to pee, do this. So you stop for like 15 seconds and you say to yourself, what have I been thinking? And then you let your mind tell you what you've been thinking. I'm thinking my boss is a jerk or blah, 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 right? How's that making you feel? Angry, bitter. What do you want to do about that? Well, that's not even my feeling. I'm just going to let that go because that anger doesn't do anything for me. So that is from the cognitive processing therapy, which is based for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And that it's from this great big, PTSD workbook, but it can be an everyday skill. Every time you do that, what have I been thinking? How am I feeling? What's the outcome? You start to build a new neural pathway in your brain because our brains are malleable, right? So when you start to build that new neural pathway, if your inner voice has been negative and you're able to kind of turn that around, you start a new neural pathway. And so every time you do that, you have the opportunity to sandbag that negative one and build on this new neural pathway. There's no way that your brain can't not respond. I know that's a double negative, but that's how I want to say it. Your brain will respond. You have to be consistent. That other neural pathway wasn't built in a day, so you can't expect to turn the Titanic, right? I'm just reminded of an incident that happened out at the Dartmouth shopping center. There was a 4-way stop, and sometimes you don't pay attention because you're a flippant to it. And I was turning right, and there was nobody kind of doing in that way, so I turned right. And lo and behold, there was someone, 2 people, a man and a woman in this real flashy Mustang, who was turning left, but there was 2 lanes. So he should have been turning in this lane. I should be turning in that lane. And he stopped traffic. And he started yelling at me and swearing and carrying on. And I'm like, dude, what it must be like to live in your skin. Like, I was like, ew. And then we ended up at the next light because he wanted the lane I was in. And I didn't care what lane I was in, but it was actually him that was in the wrong place. And he continued to yell and scream at me. And I'm like, oh, I can't even with that guy, right? What must it be like to live in skin like that? To be that angry all the time that you can lose your C.HT on some stranger. So this is another super important message. Q-tip. Quit taking it personal. So that guy was yelling at me. I didn't take it personal. I said to myself, man, buddy, you need to chill. You need to just take a breath. And his partner was screaming and giving me the finger. I'm like, holy man, guys. So that is really important. Quit taking it personal. So remember how I have lots of words on my tongue? We're coming to the end of my time. So I wanted to share this picture. This is me and my dad at his 80th birthday. And as in true a German Mennonite style, we don't hug. We don't show emotion. That's just not done. And so my aunt came up and I just plopped my head on his shoulder. She took the picture and pulled. It looks like way different than what it actually was. But that's my favorite picture now. I love, my dad died a few years ago. Rest in peace, Dad. He was a complex man. He wasn't emotional, but I knew from the very depths of my soul how much that man loved me. How much. Never a doubt. Never a doubt. I don't know how, but there just was not a doubt. The last message that I want to give to you today is please, please, don't allow someone to tell you that you can't. Doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter what they know. It doesn't matter what their experience is. You do you. And if you want to be a flibbertigibbet, be a flibbertigibbet. Right? You want to be silly and you want to dance, do that. Right? You want to contact someone and write a chapter in a book, do it. Right? So that's my motto. She thought she could. And so she did. Blue skies smiling on me, nothing but blue skies do I see. Oh, bluebirds singing a song, nothing but blue skies from now on. I hope that something wonderful happens for you today. Thank you.